the church we are a part of, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. And I've been here almost a year now, which is pretty exciting, so this is kind of fun that we get to explore this congregation together, because I've been learning about all the things that this church, Emmanuel, does, and we can share in that together. So let's get started. So we're going to be going kind of back, yes, perfect. We're going to kind of be going, like, starting on a journey for what is the church, what is the ELCA, and what is our place as Emmanuel in Lutheranism and in the body of Christ as a whole. So that's sort of the premise of this today. And feel free to ask me any questions as we go along. That'll make it more fun. And also at the end, if you have any questions, if I forgot anything, please let me know. So, what is a Lutheran? Now, I know our confirmands right now are sort of knee-deep in wading through all of the things that it means to be Lutheran. And how many of you have been confirmed in the Lutheran Church? A couple of you? Well, that's good. So we have some variety here, which is awesome. So this will be great. So some of the things that are the basic tenets of being Lutheran is, first of all, you've heard of something called the Reformation. If you think back to your history or European history in the 1500s, there was a Catholic monk named Martin Luther who stirred up the world, and in just 1 week from today, which will be October 31st, which is what we as Lutherans and many Protestants around the world celebrate as Reformation Day, and usually we celebrate Reformation Sunday, whatever Sunday is the closest before the day, and usually we do All Saints after that. We kind of recognize or celebrate the fact that, according to legend, Martin Luther wrote up 95 things that he thought could be better about the Catholic Church that was existing in medieval Europe at that time. He put it on the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, and basically went viral. It was sort of one of the first things in history that took off and spread like wildfire, and part of that was, of course, because the printing press just so happened to be invented right around this time, so people took it, printed it off, printed all of Luther's works, and off they went. Luther wasn't intending to make a schism or a break from the Catholic Church, but things happened, and according to the history books, there was irreconcilable differences. And so here we are today. Ironically enough, he would kind of be appalled that we call ourselves Lutherans. That is not something he was excited about. But here we are, taking on the name of Luther, being in his historical and theological footprints, if you will. So one of the things that he was really big on, at the risk of oversimplifying Luther, who was a very complicated man, is grace. He was one of the few people at the time who was able to actually read the Bible in its original languages, and over he kept seeing the insurmountable, the incredible grace of God, and in a way that sort of chased him throughout his life. It's something that guilt and shame was something that he struggled with, but once he kind of had this theological breakthrough and seeing all the amazing places that God does break through with grace in the Bible and in his own life, that kind of became a tenet, one of the main tenets that he wrote so much of his theology about. We are saved by grace, of course, through faith, not by our works, but by this incredible gift from God. So that is sort of, if we have a core or have a central tenet about who we are and what sets us apart as Lutherans, that would probably be the big one. Yes?
Also by our deeds, right? Not only by faith.
There is a place for deeds. Yes, that is a really good question, because we can definitely fall off on the other side. That actually gets to, we'll skip to the and part. So the third part is we as Lutherans love the word and. So I probably should add to this list. So we have law and gospel. So we should add grace and works. It is a bit more of like a hierarchy in the sense of which is more important? If we had to pick one, I would say Lutherans would pick grace as more important, but our works and our deeds, God doesn't need them, but our neighbors do. And that's a quote from somewhere in Luther. Our neighbors need our good deeds. And so that is sort of the manifestation or how we can see our faith at work. So grace and works are very, very tightly interwoven, though sometimes we as Lutherans tend to not want to talk about the deeds as much because of the history of the medieval Catholic Church at the time. It was so deed heavy. You have to do the things you have to do them in order, and this is how you do them. And Luther kind of coming against it from the other side. Sometimes we can fall off the horse on this side and we can fall off the horse on this side. And really we should try to more be in the middle. But that is an excellent question. And something that sometimes we as Lutherans don't want to talk about as much. We don't want to get into the concrete deeds, how to do them, how to live your life. So you're probably not going to hear as much about that in the Lutheran Church, but they are still really important. And we'll talk about all the service opportunities and the good deeds that the Lutheran Church, and including ours, is doing. Great question. Did that answer it? Sort of. Okay, great. So yeah, we'll keep going with the and. So we hold the tension. We love holding tension between law and gospel. Law is basically the things in our lives that bring us up short, and we know, oh, I really need God's grace. And then gospel, of course, meaning good news. So we kind of hold those in tension. Death and resurrection.
By
Yes.
law, you mean the law of God or law of
Yes. Well, yes. Law meaning where we come up in our lives, where we come up short, whether it's the law of God. That's a good example of it. The law of God, the Ten Commandments, which I'm constantly breaking, the Eighth Commandment. If you follow, related, Luther's Small Catechism, which is the little book, I don't have one with me, his explanations on the Lord's Prayer, Apostles' Creed, missing one, Lord's Prayer, Apostles' Creed, Ten Commandments, that's what it was. So the Eighth Commandment, Luther explicates on it and says it's not just about bearing false witness, it's about even thinking that we really should interpret our neighbor's actions in the best possible light. So yeah, where we realize that God, the person that we should be, we are not living up to that potential constantly. So that's, part of sin. It's where we realize we are sinful beings who aren't perfect, who are broken, and there's nothing we can do to make us reconcile to ourselves, God, and one another. And that's where the good news and the gospel comes in.
You say we cannot do?
We cannot. Yeah, there's nothing we can do to bring us into reconciliation with God. That is all God's work through Jesus on the cross. And that's a really huge part of what Luther was talking about and what we believe as Lutherans.
God wants us to be passive and just wait?
That is kind of getting to we can get too into grace if we that is one potential danger zone that we can get into about oh, okay, so if I'm saved by grace, then I can just sit back and do nothing. So that kind of seems like what Luther could be saying, but that's kind of where the both and come in, that God is at work in us doing the good deeds through us. So in ELCA we have this tagline that you may have heard bandied about: God's work, our hands. So this is God's work. It's God's kingdom that God is enacting in our lives, in the lives of our communities, in the lives of our neighbors. And we get to be the conduits. It's not like we don't have any autonomy and any choice in the matter, but God is the one providing the opportunities and the gifts of being able to say yes to these opportunities. And I would say the example that you may have been hearing about our Afghan refugee family, that we didn't go seeking that opportunity. We never signed up to sponsor a family, and all of a sudden, boom, we have this opportunity. And how are we to say no? So that is God providing both the opportunity and for us to be able to say yes. I know this is kind of oversimplifying it. We can have a conversation about this later if you want. And this is kind of the big overview, and I'm definitely like oversimplifying a lot of this. But going back to kind of also the saint and sinner idea. So Martin Luther is not a mathematician. So one of the other big things he was really into, and we as Lutherans hold to, at least I do, is that we are 100% saint and 100% sinner. And what I mean by saint isn't necessarily the traditional Catholic definition of saint, where, you know, so-and-so did so many miracles and they lived this really perfect life. A saint is anyone who is called by God, living in the world, doing God's work by their hands. So when we say like saints of the faith, it's people in our lives who are doing things like Habitat for Humanity or Faucet's Meals. Like, I would call those people saints. So we don't have the same, and also the level of veneration. We don't venerate our saints, we lift them up as excellent examples. People we should strive to get to know and to be like. And in a few weeks, we're going to also celebrate something called All Saints' Day, which is traditionally also called All Souls' Day, where we remember all of the saints who have gone before us in the past year we've lost. So those people are saints. Basically everyone is a saint, but also everyone is also 100% sinner. We're broken. We don't live up to the potential that God has called us to every time. And of course, 100%, that doesn't jive. I've had a friend of a friend who was Catholic who was talking to me, and we were talking about that for some reason. He's like, that's fuzzy math. I was like, yes, it is. But it's also faith, right? That's something that we can take on faith, and like, at least I know that that's true based on my lived experience. Sometimes I'm just like, I just can't do the right thing today. And sometimes I'm like, dang, everything's going on all these cylinders, and like, God is putting all these amazing things in our lives. And which is awesome. So we live in this tension, kind of this both and at the same time. And theologians who are more articulate, way more articulate than I am, have written books and books and books, really parsing out what this Lutheran theology means. This is just really kind of surface level, basic, 100,000 feet, tweet level social media post type things. So if you have any questions about any of these things, please let me know later. We can have a conversation. I would love that. And the last thing, you have a question?
Yeah, is there a difference in the Bible, in the Lutheran Bible and the Catholic Bible? Did Martin Luther change anything in the Bible?
Ooh, this is a great question. The question was, is the Lutheran Bible different than the Catholic Bible? So the short answer is yes and no. See the word and. So to kind of even go back farther to before the Bible as we know it was one cohesive thing. Of course, the Bible is made up of tons of books, and over the centuries, it kind of got codified into these are the books that we, as a faithful community, the community of God, find most edifying for our community. And some of them are like definitely in, and some of them are like, okay, this is helpful, but maybe not for everyone. So that's what is, maybe you've heard the term canon within a canon. So there's books that like we all agree on, and then there's books that are like, they're fine, but you're not going to see in the Lutheran canon or the Lutheran Maccabees, or Bell and the Dragon. There's some really fun ones out there. Those are, consider those apocryphal books. That doesn't mean they're not inspired, and we're actually going to get to that in a little bit. What is the Bible, and what do we believe about it? They're not that they're bad, and not that they're like, we got to cut this out. We got to cut this out of the Bible because it's like secret knowledge, and we don't want people to know about it. Like you see in the movies, like the Dan Brown books that are all like, oh no, they got books in the Bible because people wanted to hide it. That's not necessarily the case. So Luther particularly found this list of books of the Bible particularly helpful. The Catholic Church has mostly the same, but a couple of different ones. And interesting to know, there was some books of the Bible that Luther wanted to cut out. Like he wanted to throw out James, because James is very, very works heavy, actually. There's definitely some gospel in there, but it's less gospel focused than some of the other books of the Bible. So if Luther would have gotten his way, maybe we wouldn't have had the book of James in there. So it's not because of hidden knowledge or anything like that. It's just sort of this is what we as Lutherans find most edifying. Like, for example, in the Jewish faith, they only have the First Testament, what we would consider the Old Testament. Is that helpful? Yeah, lots of also good scholarship has been done around this as well, but a great question. Another one that might be interesting to talk about is one of the more visible differences between Lutherans and, like, say, Catholics and even some other of the Protestant denominations is how many sacraments we have. Some denominations have no sacraments. There are other denominations, for example, the Catholic Church, that have 7. Does anyone remember, we're going to dig into confirmation class here for those of you who are confirmed. Do you remember what the Lutheran definition of a sacrament is? I don't remember. I mean, this is kind of a hard one. It's kind of a trick question. So the reason that we have 2 and other denominations have more is because our definition is a little bit different than the definition of other denominations. Our definition is what makes a sacrament, the words of Jesus. What makes a sacrament an earthly, tangible element. What makes a sacrament is a promise from God or Jesus. So for baptism, Jesus' words are, it's from the end of Matthew. Does anyone remember them? Go baptize and make disciples of all nations. The earthly element, of course, for baptism is water. That's right. And the promise is, I will be with you to the end of the age. And then for communion, Jesus' words are, this is my body and blood. Very good. Earthly element are bread and wine. Yep. And the promise is, this is given for you, and sort of related that Jesus will be with us. So that's why, baptism and communion have kind of all those criteria for sacraments, whereas marriage, you can kind of see why that's not a sacrament in the Lutheran Church. And I can't remember what some of the other ones are. What was that?
It's amazing. I'm surprised marriage is not part of it.
Yeah. So this marriage was not instituted by Jesus, and there's no like earthly thing that Jesus
That's true. He didn't do
instituted.
it.
Yeah, it kind of blows people's minds. What was that?
Last rites, confession.
Last rites, confession, marriage, holy orders. Also, another interesting thing is in the Lutheran Church, everyone can participate in every sacrament. Whereas even in other denominations that have 7, there are some that you can't take holy orders and get married. So in the Lutheran Church, you can participate in every sacrament. And also, fun fact, Martin Luther almost made confession, or almost was trying to get confession to be the 3rd sacrament. So kind of glad he didn't go that far, but of course confession is a huge part of our worship service, which we will actually get to next, but not quite yet. The last thing we want to mention is I kind of just touched on the Small Catechism. The Small Catechism, I don't have a tiny example, but there is a version in the end of our hymnals. It's a small book that is Luther's basically teachings on the kind of the big three aspects / tenets / the things that you memorize in Sunday school, parts of our faith. As I said, the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, and the Ten Commandments. Those are probably like, if you had to pick like the big three, like what three basic things would you teach to a space alien about the Christian faith? You probably would pull out those three things. So, and there's other things in the small catechism that he talks about too.
What are they? The three?
The Apostles' Creed, the Lord's
The
Prayer.
Apostle one?
The Apostles' Creed.
Creed.
Yeah, the Creed, yeah, sorry. The Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments. Yeah, those are like pretty high up there. So basically Luther's like, here's the, commandment number 1, here's what it is, and here is kind of his explanation about it. And what I was talking about, like the 8th commandment, Martin Luther kind of goes, in the commandments, he talks about, like, it's not just about breaking, like, not just about not murdering, but it's also treating our neighbor with kindness, respect, doing good deeds for them, and helping them out. So it's sort of like, yeah, we thought we were all right, not murdering people. But he kind of flips it on his head and says it's more than just about kind of the legalism and not doing the thing. It's also about doing good things. So that is also, it's tied in. All right, let's go to the next slide. I just want to be aware of time here because I feel like I could go on and on forever, and we have a few more slides. But that was a great discussion on that section, and great questions. So just kind of an overview of how do Lutherans worship. I think just about all of us were either in worship today, or we're watching online, or have worshipped online. So you may have noticed a few things about how we worship as Lutherans. We are considered what is called a liturgical church, which is just a fancy way to say work of the people. So that's why we have back and forth. We have times where the pastor or the leader speaks, and we have times where all of you speak and participate and sing as well. So there is, just kind of just breeze through this part. You may have noticed that there's a particular order that we do things in. We might like start out with a song, but usually, normally, we have some sort of like either confession or blessing and absolution and forgiveness, or like sometimes we'll have the baptismal font to do with Thanksgiving for baptism. We usually have at least one Bible reading. There's 3 actually that could be read every Sunday morning from something called the Revised Common Lectionary. Anybody heard that? That's a couple, yeah. So that's a really kind of insider baseball term. But the Revised Common Lectionary, a lectionary is kind of a series of readings, because if we actually read through the entire Bible in small chunks on Sunday mornings, it would probably take us like 30 years. So theologians and pastors throughout the ages got together at one point and said, all right, let's create a 3-year cycle, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then throw some John in interspersed, so John doesn't get his own year, unfortunately, but like we'll throw some John in there. We'll have an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Psalm, and a Gospel reading. So if you walk into just about any Protestant or Catholic church on a Sunday morning, you are almost guaranteed to hear the same or very similar. There's like a couple of different tracks within the lectionary, but you're almost guaranteed to hear the same 3 Bible readings. No matter where you are, what part of the world you are, maybe different languages, but you are guaranteed in a Protestant church probably to, at least a Lutheran church, hear the same 3 Bible readings, which is kind of awesome that we're participating in. This is one of the ways we're participating with the larger church. It does pose some issues in the sense that there are parts of the Bible we never hear through the lectionary. There's a lot of cutting and a lot of editing that unfortunately needs to happen. But also the good thing is like the pastor can't just cherry pick their favorite verses and preach on them all the time. So it does force us to kind of confront, where is God at work in these Mark readings that sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what's happening. But and our job is to hopefully try to connect the story that is being told about God in our text to the story that is being told in your lives. And hopefully that happens more often than not, or at least for many people, but at least we try. And the last thing I'll say about worship is that you may have noticed that we have a special calendar, depending on how long you've been worshiping with us. We kind of do our own time, and sometimes it kind of lines up with like the regular, the things you may see on your Google Calendar. Sometimes it's a little bit different. Like you may have heard of the season of Lent. That's of course the days that are leading up to Easter. And actually right now we're in the season after Pentecost, which is why we have colors. We have colors for all of these seasons, so occasionally you'll see the colors change, sort of like fall. Right now we're in the long green season, but very, very soon, actually next week, we're going to be in red because it's Reformation, and then we'll be in white because it's All Saints Day, and then we'll be green a little bit more. But then the next season, does anyone know the next season that's coming up in December? Advent, yep, and that is blue or purple. It used to be purple. Many churches now do blue. I think we do blue here, yes? Yeah, but you'll see either one. And blue is the color of hope, and it's a very hopeful season, and not to be confused with however many shopping days are left before Christmas. So, Advent is this beautiful season that will be coming up, and it'll be awesome. So watch for the color changes. Any questions about worship and liturgy, or like, why do we do this in worship? We good? All right, we'll move on. Awesome. Okay, so what is in a name? Or why do we call ourselves this acronym ELCA? Because we have to call ourselves something. We're Lutheran, but we're like a particular kind of Lutheran, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. So what is part of this name, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America? So evangelical, you may be surprised that that's part of our name. It's gotten a lot of bad press, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, but it's in our name, and we want to claim it as what it really means, which means evangelion, good news, Jesus, grace. That's basically what evangelical means, sharing of the good news, which ultimately is what our purpose is as the church. Next, in ELCA, Lutheran, we covered that, good, check. Church, ecclesia, comes from the Greek word ecclesia, which means gathering, so obviously we're a church/Christian church, so that's where the C comes from. And then not in the acronym is the little word that comes before American, which is in and not of. Because I know I've heard some people slip up and say Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. And it's a very subtle difference of why it's in and not of. And it's a little hard to explain, so I'm going to try to do my best. Of kind of connotes that you belong to the thing you're of, if that makes sense, but in connotes you're located there. Or at least this is why the ELCA chose in. You're located. This is where we're located, but we're not wrapped up in, we're not party to the same, we don't consider ourselves part of the government of America / really it's the United States. And we'll kind of get to how that works itself out. So we are the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, so we are only operating as the ELCA. Our jurisdiction is the United States. So put a pin in that, and we'll get to that more in a second. But we're going to the next one, but then we're going to back up even farther. And just briefly, I kind of mentioned this earlier, what is a church? Kind of a combination of Jesus and the Great Commission, baptize, make disciples of all nations, do all that cool stuff, tell people about me. And then Pentecost, which is awesome, from Acts 2, so the day, the story where Peter and the disciples were hanging out in Jerusalem just after he died and was resurrected. And the tongues of flame and the languages, that's sort of considered the birthday of the church, because that's when they really kind of lit the fire underneath them, and they went out and really started spreading this church. So when we say Pentecost, like right now is the season after Pentecost. Pentecost is the day that happened way back in May. And so that's kind of the time that we're marking, is after we celebrate the Feast of Pentecost, which happens usually kind of around the end of May, beginning of June, and it's another time that we get to wear red, which is awesome. So that's fun. All right, we'll go to the next slide, and just a little bit more of what kind of some of the more specific things that set us apart as the ELCA from other denominations. I mentioned before, we believe that the Bible is inspired by God and written through people, containing historical context, which I find, I'm really nerdy, so I really love learning about all of the different, eras and time periods and cultural practices that were happening, like when Jesus was doing this thing or when this thing in Nineveh was happening. We believe that the Bible contains truths about God and God's relationship with us. It tells a story of who God is and tells a story of who we are as God's people. And as I mentioned, we're interpreting it through both historical and metaphorical lenses, which basically means there's so many layers to these wonderful scriptures. There's the historical layer and the teaching layer, metaphorical layer, liturgical layer, and we get to use it in so many ways, and we read this for our entire lives, and we'll never get to the end. We'll never know everything and learn everything there is to know, which I think is so beautiful. Also, just a mention about leadership and who gets to be leaders in the Lutheran Church. Everyone! Regardless of gender or sex or sexuality or ability, people can be in wheelchairs, people can be trans, people can be not married or married, people can be women. So as I mentioned, we are different from the other Lutheran denominations because we ordain all these types of people, and, well, women, but as well. But I couldn't be a pastor in the Missouri Synod or in the Wisconsin Synod Church. And there's actually some other Lutheran denominations as well. But we are by far the most open to who gets to be a pastor. And that's a big deal. Like, that's a big deal for a lot of people because representation matters. And Pastor Tony mentioned today, we're working on this thing about making our building better accessible. Someday you could call a pastor in a wheelchair. And what would her or his experience be like as leading all of you? We want to make that happen. So that's kind of a future forecast for you. And then lastly, which is something that makes us different from other denominations and also different from other Lutheran denominations, is we practice open table, which means that anyone and everyone who professes Jesus, who believes, who has faith, and we're not going to check your faith card at the door, everyone who comes forward for communion and puts out their hand, we will give you will get communion. Like, we will commune you. We're not going to ask you, have you been to confession? We're not going to ask you, are you a member of this church? Are you a member of the Lutheran Church? We're not going to ask you that. There are some denominations where you have to be part of that denomination, or even part of that congregation is the only people who get to take communion. But when we say all are welcome, we mean it, which I think is pretty awesome. And I know I've known many people for whom that has been a powerful experience in their lives. So that's cool. At least I think it's cool. Right, next one. And that's a typo. This should be, so a little bit about our structure in the ELCA. We have I'll get to what a synod is in a minute, but we have smaller kind of groupings that have bishops, something called bishops, and then we have one person who is the presiding bishop over the entire ELCA. So our bishop in Metro DC, that should say, is Bishop Layla Ortiz, and I think she was consecrated, not consecrated. She became our bishop like less than 2 years ago, which was pretty awesome. And then our presiding bishop, and she's been the presiding bishop for a number of years, many, many years now, at least 8 or so years, is Elizabeth Eaton, who is really cool. And it's cool when you get to meet her. She our home base, our ELCA home base is in Chicago, so that's where she works from, but she's cool. All right, so next one, just to kind of put us in a location as far as where we fit in the larger body of Christ. So we have ELC, that's our congregation. We're in the middle, or we're in the Metro DC Synod, which is the subgrouping of the ELCA. And then, I want to say we're a church of three expressions: the individual churches, the Synod, and churchwide. And I want to say we're part of four expressions, and that's the Lutheran World Federation, which is the global communion of the Lutheran Church. So we're not organized in the same way as the Catholic Church is, I think it's the Methodist Church, that are global communions, and then their subgroupings are by country and whatnot. We're kind of the ELCA is like an autonomous Lutheran body, but we are in a communion with 90-some odd other Lutheran denominations from around the world, and we call ourselves the Lutheran World Federation. And they get together every couple of years and hang out and have assemblies. And I was privileged to go to one of them in 2017. I was chosen to preach, which was pretty awesome. So I got to kind of see what global Lutherans are like in action, which is fun. And then, of course, we are located within the larger Christian church worldwide. So we are part of many concentric circles, but we are part of the body of Christ and beholden to the body of Christ too. All right, next. So let's get into what a synod is. So we have, in the ELCA, we have 65 synods, which is basically the same as a diocese. It does get a little confusing because there are denominations. There are separate denominations that call themselves, for example, the Missouri Synod and the Wisconsin Synod. Those are not synods part of our ELCA. It's kind of confusing. And they're not just in Missouri and Wisconsin either. There is at least Missouri Synod Church not that far from here. So those denominations are nationwide. And we also have something subset called synods, and some of them are in Wisconsin and Missouri. It's a little confusing. But anyway, when we say synod, we are meaning kind of the subgrouping of mostly geographical. There is one non-geographic synod. They're the Slovak Zion Synod. They're mostly on the East Coast. Fun fact, my mother-in-law is a pastor in the Slovak Zion Synod, and they do their synod assemblies on a cruise. They go on a cruise because they're like kind of all over the eastern seaboard. So it's like, where are you going to meet that central? Like here in Metro DC, we get, there's probably somewhere within an hour that most of us can get to. They go on a cruise, which is cool. Well, not during COVID time, but pre and post COVID. So fun. They're a fun group. All right, that's enough about synods. So let's go to the family tree. The rest of these shouldn't take us long. So I know you can't read that at all. But the point is, where in the world did the ELCA as a grouping come from? Because, we came from three predecessor bodies, we call them, which is kind of an odd thing to say. But we came from the AELC, the ALC, and the LCA. I know lots of them. We love acronyms. In 1988, we're like, hey, let's get together and make a new denomination. It was more complicated than that. But that's what happened. So we were born in 88, but we come from this long line of previous Lutheran denominations. And I remember in seminary, I think it was on internship, I read the most boring paper, the most boring assignment I've ever read. And it was but I still remember it, so it was probably really effective. And it was all about, this year, these two Lutheran churches combined, and this year, these two Lutheran churches split apart, and it was combining and splitting, and combining and splitting, until finally, a lot of us, not everybody, obviously, but a lot of us got together in 1988, and here we are. So it's kind of normal for Lutheran Church to combine and split and combine and split. And all this to say that there was a couple of recent decisions that the ELCA made at some different church-wide events, and there were some splinter groups that have come off. And it's not just the 2009 decision. There was before that, there was the agreement about, this is really insider baseball, the historic episcopate in our communion with the Episcopal Church. There were people who were upset about that and kind of like splintered off into their own thing. And then when 2009 happened, which was when we finally could say anyone, regardless of anything, can be ordained, there were people who were upset by that. So they splintered off. And people were like, oh no. And it is serious. It's not a good thing. But it's also what Lutherans have been doing for a long time. So it's reality, but also a hope that the ELCA has been here for a little while, longer if you count everybody, and we're still going to be here. We're not going anywhere. All right, next one. This is really old, but it's a fun little map to show you who is where. Now this is Christian churches, and kind of who is the greatest population, like what denominations are the greatest population where. Red is Baptist, blue, light blue, the baby blue is Catholic, and that orange is Lutheran. So the Midwest, a lot of Lutherans. And if you can kind of see where we are, it's kind of the mishmash of Catholic and a lot of Baptist. And I think green is Presbyterian, and I don't remember what yellow is, and the kind of the brown is Mormon. But it's kind of fun to see where are we located. We are not the majority. The Lutherans are not the majority here, but that's a good thing. It's kind of I think it's fun. I grew up in the Midwest where you can be culturally Lutheran. And I say that to people here, and people look at me like I have 3 heads. And I'm like, what? Yeah, you can be culturally Lutheran, which I think is not as much of a thing here. But I think that also means we have a really good sense of our identity as Lutherans, because we have to. Right, next. So as part of the ELCA, we get to have colleges. Yay! So these are the ELCA sponsored or partnered colleges that we have all around the country. And they're fairly well evenly spaced. And the 3 that I wanted to highlight that are closest to here are Roanoke, which is here in Virginia, Thiel College, which is in Pennsylvania, near Philly-ish, and then Gettysburg, which is, of course, in Gettysburg. All good schools. So if you know a young person in their lives who's that age and is thinking about going away to college, think about an ELCA school. I went to Wartburg College, which is in Iowa, and I had a great experience, so I recommend it. So, right, next. Oh, yes, you have a question?
I went to Wittenberg University.
Yay! We're everywhere! We got Wittenberg! Yeah! So there were a few of us that I think went to Lutheran school, so they're really fun. Highly recommend. So, all right, next one. And then the next step, if you get through college, and well, really this is for any age. You don't have to be just out of college to go to seminary to become a pastor. But we have, it's kind of small print, but we have a number of ELCA seminaries that we tend to send our pastors to go to do their 4 years, 3 years of academic work and 1 year of internship to get our Masters of Divinity, which is a really fancy sounding, very specialized degree, basically to be a pastor or other rostered minister. So we have 2 rosters. We call them Word and Service and Word and Sacrament. So a traditional pastor is your Word and Service. That's what I am. I'm on that roster. Deacons are Word and Service. And their roles are similar but slightly different, but both get ordained. And both are very important in the life of the church. And these are some of the places you can go or send the people who you care about, who have come to you and you say, you know what, I'm really discerning the call to be a pastor. And you can say, great, I'd love you to talk to Pastor Tony or Pastor Lydia, and we can get you set up. It's really exciting, and that's what, you've all been kind of there before. Micah is a daughter of the congregation and was lifted up, and off she went, and now she's in seminary, and that's a gift that we can keep on giving, which is awesome. And a little shout out, I went to Luther Seminary in Minneapolis, and you can ask Pastor Tony where he went to. He went somewhere else, which is just as good. All right, the next one. So now we're going to kind of back up again and just talk briefly about, I mentioned a little bit about we're part of the Lutheran communion that we call the Lutheran World Federation, which, as I mentioned, they meet every 7 or so years. They talk about things like, who are we going to be in the world? What sort of things are we going to stand for? They also elect, I should have had a picture of him. They also elect their version of a presiding bishop kind of over the global communion of Lutherans, which is kind of fun. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's from Nigeria. Really nice guy. But we as the ELCA also not just are part of the Lutheran World Federation. We have something called companion synods. So Metro DC Synod, so every synod in the ELCA has one or more companion synods, and some synods have more of a partnership than other synods. Our partner companion synods are El Salvador, Namibia, which is fun, and Slovakia. I wanted to mention Young Adults in Global Mission. Anyone have Young Adults in Global Mission? No? Has this congregation had any who have gone into YAGM? No?
So what do they do?
Yes, no?
I think Micah, right?
Oh, she was YAGM. Oh, you're right, yes. Okay, so at least one. And so there's a program for the ELCA called Young Adults in Global Mission, where after your college, you can basically, it's sort of like the Peace Corps for Lutherans. It's an intentional year of service. And there are many countries around the world that you can go to. Argentina and Central Europe, parts of Africa. I think there's at least one in Southeast Asia. They're hiring right now, actually, because of COVID. They had to, put the program on pause for a couple of years. But now they're hiring country coordinators, and so you need to be a little bit older and more experienced to be a country coordinator. But the opportunity for the young adults kind of post-college age, I haven't been able to do it, but I have so many friends who have, and it's such a valuable experience.
What
Yes.
about people who don't go to college? After high school, is possible to participate?
I think it might be geared more toward the year after your college. I could be wrong though. I don't know if it's a gap year kind of situation. I'll look into that because I don't know. I'm embarrassed to say, but it's specifically for around college age young people. And like I said, I've heard it's great. And then one more thing about the World Council of Churches, which is sort of what it sounds like. I don't really know a ton about them except that they are ecumenical. And so this is all denominations are part of this World Council of Churches, and they get together and do different types of efforts and programs and take on issues and justice issues. And one example that I wanted to bring up is something that I learned when I was in Namibia at the Lutheran World Federation Assembly, something called Thursdays in Black. And if you follow me on Facebook, I wear black every Thursday. And that began, I think it was in a number of years ago in Argentina. And it is a social media movement that raises awareness for gender-based violence and rape around the world. And it's something that got started by these women in Argentina, started wearing black every Thursday to kind of protest the gender-based violence that was happening. And then different churches around the world kind of picked it up, and then the Lutheran World Federation picked it up, and then the ELCA picked it up. So if you see the hashtag on Thursdays, Thursdays in Black, that's why. All right, next one. We are also not just a global church, but a partnering church. So these are some of them, I probably missed a few. These are the mostly Protestant denominations we are in full communion partnerships with. And what that means is we we practice open table, but like these are people who like, come on in, take communion, you're welcome. But it also means we have done the intentional partnerships that we could do pulpit supply or pulpit swap, or an ELCA pastor, rostered pastor, could serve as a priest in the Episcopal Church and vice versa. And I know pastors who have done this. Or, the Reformed Church, the Moravian Church, UMC, that we can also do. We've done the work on partnering with, we can share pastors, trade pastors, ELCA pastors can serve in these settings, and vice versa. Any questions about that? Right, the next one, we're almost through. We're also a very caring church, and these are just some of the many things that we do outside of our denomination, but are sponsored and supported by the ELCA. What I mean by that is that like World Hunger, ELCA Good Gifts, Lutheran Disaster Response, in the Lutheran Immigration, LIRS, and LSS, which have been in the news a lot lately with what's going on right now with the refugee crisis. Almost, if you donate to these organizations, 99.9% of your money will go directly to the people in need. The ELCA is the one that eats the overhead, and so almost none of your money will need to go to administrative costs. And that is a ministry that the Lutheran Church does, and I think that's amazing. So, again, this is not an exhaustive list. We do lots of things. Right, next one. We're also a public church. So if you check out the ELCA website, which will be at the very end, we like to put out things called social statements. Like if there's something that's a topic in the world that seems to be really fraught or just really a topic of conversation, something that we're all working through. The ELCA, we like to put together task forces and Bible studies, but eventually we kind of come up with a document that says this is what the ELCA kind of believes. Some of them take stronger stances than others. Some of them there's room for nuance, and some of them we kind of wish would be more clear. But these are just a couple of the social statements that the ELCA has put out over the years. And I think they're working on one right now. I think it's on public civic life. So kind of the relationship between the church and the government. So not like we're not talking about that at all right now. So stay tuned about that. We also sponsor a lot of advocacy work. And then Amparo is an acronym. I don't remember all the words, but that is a specific ministry advocacy network that supports unaccompanied minors. And then one of the things that we've also been doing as the ELCA lately is there's something called Lutherans Restoring Creation. It's a group, they put out resources. It's kind of what it sounds like. It's talking about how the church can be a factor and an influence on the fight against climate change and stewarding God's creation, and how can we be, as Christians, be better stewards of God's creation. So, next one. So here are just some things about what it means to be a member of the ELCA / a member of this individual church as Emmanuel Lutheran Church. So constitutionally, the bar's pretty low. Constitutionally, you take communion once a year, and you give something of consequence, like $1, and that's sort of like the baseline of what it means to maintain your membership. And also coming to our annual meetings, which are really good, actually, and are very informative, and kind of gives you an update about what's going on. And then you can see things like, what are we doing? What have we done? What are we going to spend our money on next year? So, maybe not the most exciting thing you want to do with your day, but also a great thing to be part of and pay attention to. But of course, that's such a low bar. But really, what membership really means in this Lutheran church is I just put up the baptismal promises. These are the promises that were made to us by the people we care about, who care about us in our baptisms. But then when we were confirmed, These are the things that we affirm as part of our faith. And we're going to hear our confirmands next week affirm these very things. So live among God's faithful people, to hear the word of God, to share in the Lord's Supper, proclaim the good news, serve all people, strive for justice and peace. So really, that's kind of the benchmark we're actually striving for when we want to become, or as we continue to be members of this congregation. All right, almost done. I'm for real. These are just not an exhaustive list, but some of the basic things that we are involved with as a congregation, daily, weekly, monthly. The one that I want to highlight right now is the opportunity we had to sponsor an Afghan family who we will call, they for security reasons and for their privacy, we're just calling them the Z family. And we're settling in nicely, but they're going to have ongoing needs over the course of the next days, months, and years. But we are involved in so many things in this community, and I think it's just awesome. Right, next one. All right, here's some just, again, not an exhaustive list of, here's some of the things you can get involved with internally here at Emmanuel. Not just the external service and opportunities, but we're always in need of people who are interested in being hospitable. Like for coffee hour and worship assistants, we're trying to build readers and greeters and ushers and worship leaders back into our worship. That's been a work in progress because of COVID, but we're always interested in the work of the people, liturgy. That's what we're all about and what the basis of our worship is. And then, of course, our annual Synod Assembly. Again, the business of the church might not be the most interesting thing you want to do with your weekend, but it's a time for us as a synod to get together, to see one another, to see what's going on in our synod, and to see what our priorities are and what we want to do with the next year together as a synod. All right, last one. We're done! So if you haven't already, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, make sure you're signed up for all of our weekly emails. And you can find out more about all the things that we do. Our website is excellent and is so expansive. Poke around in it. There's so many great things in there. We're sending out emails weekly, and then we send out something called the Evangel once a month, which is stories of what we're doing and what we're up to as a church. And so that's always a great way to know, like, what's going on? What are the good things that we're doing? And then, of course, poke around the elca.org website, and there's lots of good stuff on there. All right, questions, things that I missed. I think we're maybe a little slightly over, but we started a little late. So any other questions?
Well, you mentioned that Luther didn't want to be called Lutheran Church.
Yes, correct.
So when the Lutheran Church became the Lutheran?
That is a good question. The question was, when did the Lutheran Church become the Lutheran Church? And I don't have the answer to that. I think it was after his death. And it might have been an insult. It might have started, I want to say it started as an insult, and then we just took it on. That's a good question, though. Any other questions? Yes?
That's the symbol of Lutheran?
That is a good question. This is, it's not a Lutheran symbol, but it's a Christian symbol. And this is Latin, and I don't remember off the top of my head what it means. But it is a traditional Christian symbol, just not a Lutheran one.
Oh,
We don't claim it. We don't claim.
Catholic?
Yeah. It probably
Christian.
we probably, there's a lot of things that we share with the Catholic Church. Like if you walked into a Catholic church and participated in worship, the only two differences you probably would see is who is leading worship and who could take communion. Like liturgically, like the order, the symbols, the vestments, what we wear, what we look, what we sing, what we say, very similar. So we do a lot of sharing. The only like truly Lutheran symbol, and I should have had a picture of this, is the Luther rose, which is, I don't think, you don't have one on any of our windows. But if you see like a circle, a white rose with a blue background with a heart and and a cross in the middle, that's Luther's. There's one in the back of my car. It's a little faded, but it's there. Good question, though.
The Catholic Church is very strong on the Virgin Mary. What is the Lutheran approach or understanding to Virgin Mary?
Ooh, good. Also a good question. So the question was about the Virgin Mary. So we think she's awesome. We love her. We think she's great. She sang the Magnificat, so like you'll hear about her a ton in Advent. But we definitely don't have the same level of veneration of her as the Catholic Church does. For us, she would be amongst the saints. A really awesome lady, someone we should look up to and aspire to be, but doesn't have like a particular special place in heaven, and we don't pray to the saints. We don't pray for her intercession because we believe we can go directly to Jesus. But good question. Any others? These are good. All right, if you have any other questions about anything, feel free to let me know. So thank you for being part of today. I can go on and on, but I won't. Thanks for being here.